So, have you ever appreciated the sci-fi quality of the Bible? No blasphemy intended. There is intergalactic travel in there. There is actually made in space from a non-terrestrial point of view. There is cloning in the Old Testament. And there's definitely also a hint towards stem cell technology in producing tissues beyond sort of the natural way they usually grow. This is, of course, a scene from the miraculous multiplication of fish and bread, where Jesus fed 5,000 followers that were not intended to be there, but were there nonetheless. So why would we want to look at it, and why would we want to replicate it? Because we are going to face a very serious crisis, especially in meat production and meat supply to the growing demand in the world. And I have two other people who explain this much better than I in the following video.
Evolution is one that is intimately tied to meat. Once we started cooking meat, then we could get lots of energy, and that energy enabled us to have big brains and become physically, anatomically human. Hunters and gatherers all over the world are very sad if, for a few days at a time, the hunters come back empty-handed. The camp becomes quiet, the dancing stops, and then somebody catches some meat. They bring the prey into the camp, or nowadays into somebody's back garden with a barbecue. Everybody gets excited to come and share the meat. It is ritually cut and passed out to people. We are a species designed to love meat.
Feeding the world is a complex problem. I think people don't yet realize what an impact meat consumption has on the planet. 18% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from meat production. We're also using something like 1,500 gallons of water to produce just 1 pound of meat. Meat takes up about 70% of our arable lands. There's no question that if we were able to shift more of our land into intensive fruit and vegetable production, we'd be able to feed a lot more people a lot healthier diet. With the global population growing from 7 billion to 9 billion people, by 2050, the demand for meat will double. We can't just continue doing what we've been doing. Unless we make some changes in how we produce meat on this planet, we're in for a terrible reckoning.
Meat consumption was part of the human species. It's been fantastically beneficial for us. And now, by some horrendous irony, it's become part of a system that threatens our species. We have to do something about it.
So that's the problem. Increasing demand, maximized production. It's going to end up in an imbalance, and therefore rising prices, food scarcity, increasing pressure on crops to feed animals instead of human beings. So what can we do about it? We can, of course, become all vegetarians. That would actually be not a bad idea. It's healthy for you. It's sort of a natural way to fight obesity. And it's, of course, 2 billion people on this planet are already vegetarian, not in this room, but in the world. And they live, they procreate. So it's sort of a myth that meat is necessary for us. But what Richard says is we are a species designed to eat meat. So we are working under the assumption that we will continue eating meat. And it's not only, here in the industrialized society, meat consumption is actually going down a little bit, but not in the middle-class incomes in China and India and Russia and perhaps South America. There, historically, with increasing middle-class income, meat consumption increases together with it. And that's where the increase in demand is coming from. So if we want to become all vegetarian, we need to explain these people who, for the first time in their lives, can afford eating meat, that they should refrain from it because we think it's not good for the planet. So that's a formidable task. What are the other alternatives? Well, one of the alternatives is stem cell technology. A stem cell is a cell in our body that continuously self-renews, sort of endlessly. This is the sort of ex nihilo existence of stem cells, and then they differentiate into our tissues, into all of our tissues. That's one stem cell. Actually, all our organs have stem cells that regenerate our organs, some organs better than the others, when they get injured. And our muscle have a lot of stem cells in them. And we can take these stem cells out through a relatively innocuous procedure and take them, for instance, out from the cow, because beef is actually the biggest problem, much more so than pork and chicken. We can take that out, take a little piece of muscle, extract all the stem cells from it, and also fat cells. Fat tissue also has a lot of stem cells, actually. So we are now in the somewhat curious habit of growing fat tissue as well, as if we don't have enough of it. These stem cells still have the capacity to multiply. And actually, from one cell, you can theoretically make 10 to the 14 cells, which equates to about 10,000 kilos of beef from just a few cells taken from that cow. And these cells are really smart guys. They can become muscle again when you culture them under the right conditions. We don't have to do a whole lot to them. They merge because a muscle cell is basically one big merger of a number of cells. So they merge, and if you provide a very, very simple, so this is a merged cell, about 50 cells into one sort of muscle tube, and then they differentiate into muscle. And we need to provide just very simple cues to these cells in order for them to self-organize into a muscle fiber. And we basically trick them a little bit. They need anchor points like tendons. And we basically trick them a little bit so that we grow them in a donut so that they attach to each other, which is an elastic attachment, and they start contracting and beef up, basically, produce more and more protein. That attachment is very, very important for their building up. We can also electrically stimulate them, but from an environmental point of view, that's not really the way to go, I think. But they beef up by themselves, and after 3 weeks, you get a thick muscle fiber. I say thick, they're still tiny. They are about 2.5 centimeters long and 1 millimeter in diameter. But they, from the original point of view, they have beefed up, have a lot of protein, have a nutritional value that is very similar to our beef. And in fact, it is beef. It is a muscle fiber. So if you take these muscle strands that are currently all individually made by my technicians in the lab, which is, of course, not really the eventual way to go, and you take also that fat tissue that we are growing, then you build a hamburger. And it's basically as simple as that. This one costed 250,000 euros, so it's still not a real... Okay. That's why I could only do that, because Sergey Brin funded it. And he actually had me made 3 of them, so you can do the math. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, so you build that hamburger, and of course, we wanted to show the world that it can be done. Because basically, a lot of people were very skeptical, and a lot of people thought, well, you know, this is really, we shouldn't want to do this. So we wanted to show that this could be done, and we presented this to the public in a sort of cooking show press conference type of thing. And of course, we had to let them taste it in front of their cameras. They were reasonably enthusiastic. It's not perfect. No, she eats it. and I'm still in contact with these people. They still live. So it's not perfect. It's not a real product yet, 250,000 euro. A reasonable taste, but not great. So it's not something that you would immediately buy in the most fanciest traiteur here in Brussels, even. But it can be done. It's there. It can be done, and we need to improve it. I'm going to work on it next 2 years, still with the help of Sergey Brin. And I think it's very important that we do that because, first of all, we want to eat meat, and this is what it is. It's not a replacement, it's meat. And second, we can eventually, not now, make it more efficient. And of course, efficiency is a big issue. A cow is very inefficient. We need to feed the cow 1,000 calories of vegetable proteins in order to get 150 calories of meat proteins out of it. So that's a very inefficient way of producing meat, hence the pressure on the agriculture to feed animals instead of people. And it also needs to be exactly the same for the reason that you and I want to eat meat, except for the 3% vegetarians in the audience. So we were faced with an alleged sort of image of this is Frankenfood, this is engineered, it's made in a lab by people with white coats, and this is not what we should do. Or it may be yucky. Well, yucky is not the point because it's beef. It's just the way it is. It's the same thing. I have always interpreted it as a fear for the unknown and a fear that you now transform something that is sort of a natural food production, quote unquote, to something that is man-made and can be messed with, right? In larger multinationals or whatever, people want to economize on the production process or just make mistakes, and we get exposed to hazards of a food that we were not really asking for. So one of the best outcomes of that cooking show press conference was that The Guardian put out a poll, a survey on the web, and people responded to it, and actually 68% of the people said, yes, I would like to try that. It seems like a good idea. This was right after the show, right? Seems like a good idea, we want to try that, which makes me feel that the public, you and me as well, are actually much more adventurous in thinking about our food than or what it was originally thought. We did a poll before that in the Netherlands that was a cross-section of the entire population, so not people responding to a web poll, and there 63% said exactly the same. So UK, Netherlands, it's made in the Netherlands, so that might be a bias. UK has always been very responsive to this technology, so it might be a selection of people, and there is a majority who doesn't know or are really afraid of this technology. Now, I mentioned, the large multinationals and the lab, and so in order to separate the technology from how it's eventually going to be implemented in society, whether it's multinationals or whatever, we actually thought about this and said, well, you can do this in various ways, in various scales. You can actually do this in the comfort of your kitchen. So then you have full control over the culture process. This is a kitchen of the future in of course, an urban environment. So this is your garden also, in all those little green pots. And you have a bread maker, of course, if it's not collecting dust somewhere on the attic. And in between, you have an incubator where you can grow your own meat or fish or poultry or whatever. These cells actually survive freeze drying, so you could buy those little bags, tea bags if you like, of stem cells over the internet, reconstitute them and then grow your meat. There's one minor disadvantage: you have to know 8 weeks in advance what you want to eat. But it's actually the same with gardening. You garden and you wait for a long time to culture your food. So this is also a thought experiment: how to dissociate the technology from how it's implemented and how you can remove some of that distrust that's associated with any novel sort of destructive technology. So. Is it actually better for the environment? We don't know yet. We have to make it more efficient. Hanna Tuomisto from Oxford has done some calculations on it with a lot of assumptions. And then she came up with that it would reduce the amount of land that we need by 90%, the amount of water. Beef production, as Ken already said, uses a lot of water, can reduce the amount of water by about 90% and energy by about 70%. So it could mean a tremendous improvement on the environmental impact of beef production. Again, this is with a number of assumptions. We are not there yet, but we definitely hope we will get there, and that's the eventual goal, of course. So coming back to the biblical story, I hope at one day, let's say 1,000 years from now, we have a new glass-stained window now with the hamburgers in, of course, the magic number 12. And I have no ambition whatsoever to be the guy with the circle on his head. But I sure hope that with this technology we can eventually reduce or avert the environmental impact of beef production and feed the growing population, middle-class incomes, but also the 9 billion that we are going to face. And that's what we are heading for. I thank you very much.